Brian Hoffman. I'm the Director of Building and Energy for the city, the department that now has the sustainability efforts in our area. And wanted to bring people together today. We have another meeting just like this Thursday morning at 7:30, be a repeat of this one. We'll talk about our proposed efficient building program. And this is something that would be an ordinance that the city is looking at doing and would basically have an effect on larger commercial businesses in the city. So we want to talk about what it is, how it would affect you, why we're doing this, and get any questions, suggestions that you might have, before we go on to the next step. So we want to basically try to get everybody to be aware of this, so that's just not being done. The people here today, I've got Katie Jones from CE, who's actually going to be doing the presentation. CE is partnering with the Hennepin County Collaborative. This same program is also being done in Minneapolis and other cities in Hennepin County. The county's sponsoring some work on this, and so they've been a big asset as we've been getting this far. Thank you. We are being filmed, by the way, so don't feel nervous. And then also some folks here from the Environmental Sustainability Commission. St. Louis Park, if you didn't know, adopted a climate action plan the other year. And it's very aggressive. Basically, what it is going to mean is the whole city needs to come together and partner and figure out how we reduce our carbon emissions in the city. And so the city realizes that it's not going to happen by regulation. It's going to happen by programs. It's going to happen by initiatives, by incentives, by working with people through education. And one of the first steps in sort of our programs going forward is going to be this efficient energy program. The history of how the Climate Action Plan came together is really great. And the best person to probably tell you about that is Larry, who is on our Environmental Sustainability Commission. You've been on it for about a year and a half now. So he graciously came to give you a little background of that, and I'll give the mic over to Larry.
Great. Thank you all for coming. My name is Larry Kraft. Lived in St. Louis Park for 16 years. The story about the Climate Action Plan, a group of students actually that I was mentoring from the high school, the Roots and Shoots Environmental Club, came to the city about 3.5 years ago and gave them a report card on climate change. They gave them a B-, and then they asked the city to take action to protect their future. The result of that was the Climate Action Plan that was adopted last year. And it is an ambitious plan. It's the best in the state, but it aims for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. Now, the young people have been involved every step of the way, actually in the formation of the plan and continuing today in the implementation of it. One of their first acts after the plan was adopted is they went to the school district and asked the school district to sign on to similar things. And a couple months ago in June, the school district signed on to basically the same goals as the city through something called the Climate Leadership Resolution. From the commission perspective, one of the reasons I'm so excited about this is the business is roughly 2/3, or the commercial world, roughly 2/3 of the emissions in St. Louis Park. It's also a tremendous opportunity because there's lots of ways of doing things to hopefully save money as well as promote work that sustainable businesses do. And the other thing I will say is, very briefly, so this is especially important to me, I'm actually running for city council, and primarily the reason I'm doing it is to capitalize on this climate action plan that we have and the opportunity that provides to do things in a really unique way. So the other thing I will tell you is the work that the students did here became a model and inspired students around the state and even around the country to push in for similar things, and other cities have been following our lead. So thank you for coming, and I'll turn it back.
Thank you, Larry. Yeah, and actually what also came out of this is the ESC and the members, which we actually have student members on it, is to create a climate business champion program and initiative, and something they felt very strongly about. And so we are, over the course of this winter, going to be putting together something where we want to really encourage business owners and managers, leaders to come together, make a commitment to do things to help, one, reduce the carbon emissions, and two, also save money along the way by saving energy, reducing energy costs. And so that we get a better idea of sort of what we have for a baseline as far as how our energy usage in our buildings is performing, and so the building manager also realizes, hey, what is the energy consumption compared especially to other buildings? The first thing we need to do is really take a look at some type of a benchmarking is what it's called. So that's what the Efficient Building Program essentially is, and to tell you all about it is Katie Jones.
This should come out now. All right, hi. Thank you, Brian. Welcome, everyone. My name is Katie Jones, and I'm with the Center for Energy and Environment. I'm the Benchmarking Outreach and Policy Specialist, so I specialize in benchmarking. And I'm happy to answer any questions anytime during the presentation, so just feel free to, ping me. We're a pretty small group, so we can be kind of informal. So I'll be talking about the Efficient Buildings program that we've been working, so staff and have been working on for the past few months. Have been, that was one of the priorities from the Climate Action Plan, and we'll just dive in right now. So the four main topics I'll be talking about today are what is benchmarking, so we'll define that word. We'll talk about how we got here. We'll do that briefly since I think Brian and Larry already touched on that a lot. We'll talk about the ordinance framework as it stands today, and then the stakeholder engagement plan that we've been going through for the past month or so. So what is benchmarking? It comes down to the fact that you can't manage what you don't measure. We've got a lot of buildings here in St. Louis Park, and we want to know how efficient are they. By measuring that, we have a better chance of better managing them. And so, there's a corollary to many other aspects of our lives that we measure and then try to better manage. So when it comes to nutrition, we've got nutrition facts and calorie counters and the Fitbits. When it comes to energy efficiency of our appliances, we look for those energy guide stickers, or when we're going out and buying a car, we're looking for that MPG. So really, a good analogy for buildings is we're trying to find an MPG for buildings. And for that, I'll get into a little bit more about what that metric is, but it'll be an Energy Star score, and so it'll have a singular number for a building, so we can know right off the bat how efficient a building is. Basically, by measuring, we know how much opportunity there is for savings. And, if there's opportunity, that means there's opportunity to save money, which is great. So benchmarking brings together two silos of information that have never been brought together before in a building. So we've got the meter consumption information that includes your electricity, gas, if there's a district system, and your water as well, along with the building characteristics. So that's your area, the square footage of the building type, whether it's a school or a hospital or an office building, the schedules of the building, like basic high-level schedules, the year built, all of those types of things. When you bring them together, you get three high-level metrics. The first one is a really raw number. It's called the energy use intensity. It's measured in kBTUs per square foot per year. And so that normalizes over the area. So I can compare, for example, one K through 12 school to another K through 12 school and have a generally good understanding of how those two compare. The Energy Star score does one better, and it normalizes for the remaining characteristics in that building characteristics silo. So it takes into account building type, year built, schedules, even more details than I've got listed here, so that you can then compare an office building to a retail store to a hospital with that 1 to 100 score. And you may have actually seen buildings that have an Energy Star score around town. They range from 1 to 100, 1 being inefficient, 100 being efficient, 50 being the national median. If a building scores 75 or greater, it is eligible for Energy Star certification, which basically means you can get a plaque on the front of your building saying, hey, I've got an efficient building here. And so, that's really one of the goals is how many buildings in St. Louis Park are efficient, and if they are, let's recognize them for that. And then the third metric is greenhouse gas emissions. And, it comes back down to that climate action plan. We need to know how far are we going and how much progress are we making towards those goals. And tracking those greenhouse gas emissions from the largest buildings in the city are very important for that. So the first part, is that benchmarking piece where a building puts those two silos of information together into a system called Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So it's a nationally recognized online platform used by actually over half of the commercial building space in the United States. So it is the national standard. It takes a few hours of initial setup. Again, that depends on the level of organization of a typical building, like how accessible, do you know your square footage of the building? Do you know when it was built? How many records or filing cabinets do you need to go to find that type of information? Will really dictate the initial setup. But once that's set up, it's just a few years of data entry ongoing. It's for a few hours per year of data entry in the future, in each year going forward. And part of that is because both utilities, Excel and CenterPoint, have tools that connect directly in to Portfolio Manager to streamline that data entry process. So again, there's a little bit more setup on the beginning, but ongoing, it's just a couple of hours per year to keep that going. So that's that first benchmarking piece. And then the second part is the disclosure. So a building then submits that data to the city. And the first year is a practice year, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then in year 2, that the high-level metrics, those 3 high-level metrics that I mentioned, and a couple of other building characteristics, are made publicly available on a website. And the reason for that is, to show the market and get that information into the marketplace to help move the market towards those to higher efficient buildings. So what buildings are we talking about here? We're talking about large buildings, large commercial and large multifamily buildings. We're not including industrial buildings because industrial buildings, their energy use is based more on the widgets that they make. It's energy use per widget as opposed to energy use per building asset. And so industrial process buildings are not included in this initiative. So what have other cities seen as far as savings? There are over 30 cities throughout the United States that have benchmarking policies, and they're seeing success. Energy Star Portfolio Manager actually started out as a voluntary online program, and started in 1999. So it's been around for a long time. And a decade later, they did a study looking at is this having an effect? So looking at a number of buildings, they saw a 7% savings just via benchmarking, just being aware of how efficient a building is. Starts keying people into focusing on, I need to do this. I have opportunity here. And it's just, it's like anything else. Once you know how many steps you're taking, you're more likely to take more steps. Things like that. In the cities that have, that are kind of peers-ish, that have enough data to show some annual savings, when the cities that have had policies around long enough to show some results are listed here. So you can see it ranges from about 1 to up to 4.5%. I think Denver is kind of, I don't know what happened there, but they had a lot of success there. But generally 1 to 3% energy savings per year for a group of buildings is average. So how did we get here today and talking about benchmarking in St. Louis Park? So as was mentioned, the Climate Action Plan has a number of goals, and you can see in that orange box, there are a lot of goals around building energy efficiency. So there's a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 21.7% by 2030. And in order to do that, a big portion of that needs to come from commercial, those big size buildings. And you can see those numbers here of 30% from commercial and residential buildings, 35%. So those multifamily would fit in there. And so the council is interested in having a benchmarking ordinance developed so that there can be compliance starting in June 2020. And one of the reasons that St. Louis Park is moving so quickly on this is because the Hennepin County has developed a collaborative to make it easy for St. Louis Park to do this. The collaborative is a standardized process through which cities can share resources so that buildings can have easy access to training resources, technical assistance, things like that. And so it's really easy for the city to just plug in. The city does not have to develop that technical expertise on their own. They can rely on the county's resources for that. The county provides tools for implementation. It makes it more economically feasible. I know we've had questions in the past of that, and this is the low-cost way for cities to get into benchmarking and make it easy for buildings to do. And then also knowing that building managers, property managers, you own properties across cities and across the metro or even across the state. And so Hennepin County is actually trying to streamline streamline benchmarking as much as possible and make sure that the deadlines are the same and the process is generally the same. Obviously, using the same tool of Energy Star, Portfolio Manager, things like that, so that it's streamlined for everyone, and there's just one location to go to. So I won't go through this whole graphic, but this kind of lays out who all is involved. So Hennepin County really oversees the program and engages the cities that are interested. The cities pass an ordinance and require the benchmarking of buildings. They inform the building owners. The building's owners benchmark, and they upload their data and get help from the county's contractor, Overlay Consulting. So they are the ones who provide the help center, the technical assistance, and then they also vet the data. Overlay Consulting, they are phenomenal. They work with Boulder and Denver and LA. Like, they have a lot of experience in this, and trust them wholeheartedly in their capabilities. And then Hennepin County continues to oversee it. So that's really the process. And where CEE is fitting in here is helping with the drafting of the ordinance and helping to educate you all about what this is, as well as Great Plains Institute in organizing these things. So for the past, 6 months or so, what did you say, Brian? We've been developing this plan. We've talked about the ordinance framework. So we talked about who would be affected, when would the program be implemented, what would be involved. We created a city operations plan, what is needed from city staff, and then how to talk about it with the community, because that's a really crucial part to this, to make sure that make sure it's all making sense to everyone. So for that ordinance framework, always love PowerPoint animations. I forget how they work. So that who and what was one of the things we had to talk about really early on with city staff. So it is common that benchmarking policies affect commercial and multifamily buildings, and it's usually the largest ones. So then we had to decide, okay, what is large in St. Louis Park? You can see here on the top graph, I'm sorry if this, I'm an engineer and I like graphs, so I'm sorry if this is wonky. I'll try to explain this. On the left-hand side, that is the count of buildings in the city of St. Louis Park. So you can see that gray bar, that gray section, are all the buildings that are less than 15,000 square feet. So that's by count of buildings, the majority of St. Louis Park buildings are single-family homes, which makes sense. You kind of know that intuitively, and this bears out in the data. When you look at the buildings by area, so by square footage, that changes quite drastically. So those basically single-family homes, they only take up 43% of the square footage of buildings, as opposed to the 100,000 square foot buildings. There's only a handful of them, but they represent 33% of the square footage. So when it comes to drafting a benchmarking program, it makes sense to target the greatest square footage of building space, because that generally equates to energy usage. So we want to reduce energy usage as much as possible. So where's that sweet spot to address the greatest area, so therefore the greatest energy usage, but also not impacting too many players in the city. Is that kind of making sense? I'm good, I'm seeing some nods. So if you break out the count in that bar chart on the bottom, it kind of breaks down a little bit more the total number of buildings that we're looking at here. And actually in the Climate Action Plan, it was recommended to have that threshold of 20,000 square feet or greater. But looking at the city's resources and everything, the city is actually, staff are recommending moving forward with a threshold of 25,000 square feet and greater as classified as large buildings that would have to benchmark. Okay? And like I was saying, building types, we're just looking at commercial and multifamily. So here are some examples in St. Louis Park particular. So you've got your multifamily on the bottom, your office building on the right. I did want to show that there's this kind of warehouse type of building in the middle, and there are a handful of those in St. Louis Park. And even though that might be classified as industrial, it's not a process-oriented building. And therefore, it would be considered commercial for this program's purposes. But Nordic Ware, which is a process-oriented building, would not, and therefore it would not benchmark. So, what is the timing of this program? City buildings would benchmark first. They're actually already benchmarking in a different program, B3 benchmarking, and so it'll be pretty easy to get them into the program here, and their data would be made publicly available right away once this policy passes. And then commercial multifamily buildings would benchmark in 2020 by June 1st. And then there'd be essentially a grace year, a practice year. So 2020 is that practice year. Let's get everyone in there. There's a learning curve for everyone, both for the city and for property managers. And just knowing that, let's not make the data public until 1 year later in 2021. So that's the stakeholder framework. That's the ordinance framework. Is there any questions around that right now? Okay, good. The stakeholder engagement plan. We've been, identifying who are the primary and secondary stakeholders, mainly the owners and managers of these buildings and their representative organizations. So we've been talking to those folks. We also recognize that tenants and the community residents have an interest in this, and so that's why we've gone to the Planning Commission and to the ESC, who are more resident-based. And these are the types of organizations that we've been reaching out to, making sure they're aware that this is coming. We've been very insistent on making sure that this is it's positive. We're focusing on energy awareness, and we want to really have set up building owners and managers for success. The purpose of this is not to have a mandate. The purpose is to help building owners and managers understand how efficient their buildings are so they can improve them. The more the buildings improve, the more money there is in the bank to do those core businesses that we want St. Louis Park businesses to do. We've talked about the process. The city's going to provide resources to make this easy through the Hennepin County Collaborative. It doesn't take that many hours to actually benchmark, and we're following best practices. We're using, by using that Energy Star platform that is the standard across the country. And really the benefits, doing this is helping the city focus its resources. When we know which buildings are the least efficient, the city can create incentives and programs to help those buildings become more efficient. But the city can't do that until we have the data to know that. That kind of falls in line with that, helps businesses focus resources to save energy and money. And really, this is helping the owners and managers invest in our existing building stock and then align with the 2040 carbon neutrality goal. So this is where we are today. We're having 2 public meetings. I mentioned that we've talked to a couple of the commissions, and this is our agenda. We've been doing that. And there is availability to give feedback online. So if you leave today and you're like, a week from now you have some questions, we have the ability to answer that. So we welcome that feedback. And we are recording this, which kind of terrifies me, you know, because presenting and hearing your own voice. But it'll be out there online. So this has been our timeline. We're here in the public engagement section in September. And the plan is to go to council for a study session towards the end of this month or early October, and then begin the council process later that month. So, thank you very much. Any questions? Wow, you guys are an easy crowd. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie. So that's the information we wanted to share with you. And so I guess I want to really encourage you. Is there any thoughts, reactions, discussion you want to have? The information like energy consumption for the building, Excel, CenterPoint will be providing it. City will have the total annual water consumption. So these numbers shouldn't take a lot to put together. It'll be a matter of entering into the Energy Star system every year, and then being able to take a look at that and compare once it's compiled at the end of the year, and just see how your building's comparing, and that gives you some idea of the potential for improvements. Yes?
Would the city have access to our Energy Star, or do we have to send it in every year?
So there's a mechanism within Energy Star to submit a report to the city. So it collects like those high-level metrics and just sends those annualized metrics to the city. And
Are we prompted to do that, or will it automatically do it?
you'll be the city will send out a link that you'll have to click, and that will be the reporting template.
And as you saw, we're looking at probably about 240, I think, 230, 240 businesses, properties, buildings at this stage, just to get that going. It's manageable, and it does basically account for over 50% of the square footage. Larry?
So, I found this interesting part, but do building owners have to type in all the data themselves, or like how does that work?
No, with the Excel and CenterPoint tools, that once they're set up, the data is just dropped in there automatically, so there's no manual entry. For the water side, I know the city is looking to be able to provide that information to each building owner, and so then it would be a matter of pasting in an Excel spreadsheet.
Easy, right? Anything else? Yes?
I'm from an apartment building where we sit on top of commercial space. So how will that be taken into account? Is it my apartment square footage only, or will the business below me also be doing this?
That's a good question.
It's a great question. It would be combined. So we're trying to look at a building as the asset as much as possible because of the way ventilation flows within a building and the way heating and cooling flows within a building. So we want to set the system as a physical structure. In the case that you might, well, so in your case, yeah, you would combine those two. So you would communicate with the commercial folks and create one account in Portfolio Manager to get all that information together. So Excel and CenterPoint are able to combine so to aggregate the usage, the energy usage, so that you'll only have one number per month for both the multifamily and the commercial part together in Portfolio Manager. Does that make sense?
Although in the case of the building you're referring to, as a few of them in town, the commercial and residential are totally separated. Ventilation systems, buildings, everything, even though they're stacked. So
we'd still want them as one property. Mm-hmm. And it'd be treated as a mixed-use building as the property type in there.
Anything else? Yes.
So the due date, if you will, for what the information, I know it was mentioned that it's 1 to 2 hours, or I think the slide said more like 4.
So for setup, it takes generally between 4 and 10 hours. It depends how organized the data is that you already have. What Overlay will do is have a training that's usually like a 4-hour training. So take a half day and they teach you and you work while you're doing, and so you can get the majority of it done, if not finish it in that time. And then the next year, you're already set up with Excel, you're already set up with Centerpoint, your building characteristics are already in there. So really the only other thing to do is add in the water.
And this is the same structure as they used in Minneapolis?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing that's different is the square footage threshold. In Minneapolis, it's 50,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
I think in Minneapolis too, they started at 50 and they were looking at phasing it down to smaller buildings.
They started with commercial only, and the reason they held off on doing multifamily was to wait until Centerpoint also had one of these aggregation tools. Basically, they wanted to make sure that it was practical for the property owners. And now that Centerpoint does, so Minneapolis just passed a policy in February to include multifamily. So St. Louis Park has good timing where all the tools are already made, and so you just do it all at once.
Anything else?
Wow, you guys are great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Grab some popcorn on the way out if you want. If there's any questions too, you had the contacts. Lauren Michaels, our sustainability intern, is here, and give her a call. She can find anything you need, or myself. And we're going to have this meeting repeated on Thursday morning, and then collect any comments, concerns, and basically forward them in our report to council, which will be sometime in October. And then we can keep you updated. If you're on the list, we'll let you know the timing of things. So thank you very much. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.